that thought. So, officially, cheers. As Limang has been showing us the wine against a white surface, I hold it on an angle, and all of a sudden it's not white. It becomes, very clear that there's a specific hue. You could call this straw or even a pale yellow. In my light, it does have a little bit of green glints, not strong, but sort of more olive in color. You can either swirl the glass or just turn it. I've learned this from my tasting master, Tim Gaiser, in terms of releasing the aromatics. And if you swirl with too much enthusiasm, it's not that the wine's going to give you more. It may actually get annoyed with you. So that said, aromatically, the first thing that hits me on this wine, because I'm one of these people that don't go through it specifically according to grid subjects, but what strikes me is that the aroma is gentle but very distinct. And it is a combination of citrus fruit and also, whether you want to call it herbal, vegetal, pyrazine notes. And in terms of citrus, what's striking me aromatically is lemon and lime. Maybe a teeny little bit of white grapefruit, but it's not compelling. I smell a little tree fruit in the form of green apples. You know how different they are from let's say golden or red apples. There's a tartness even to the aroma of a green apple that is, a tell, it's a thumbprint. There's a florality to this wine that's just beautiful, really citrus blossoms, whether you want to call them lime or lemon, but it's just lovely. And then there again, I'm being pulled back into a distinct, very attractive, fresh snipped herbs, however you want to define them, cilantro, parsley, and also bell peppers, not hot peppers. But it's, again, not dominant. It's not pushing the other elements out of the room, but there's definitely what we call in wine speak a pyrazine character to the aromatic. Also, in terms of herbal, I want to add like lemongrass and maybe even any of you had purple basil. I'm obsessed with it because I grow it, because there's a sweetness to it. More so than with green basil, and maybe verbena. Beautiful aromas, distinct, citrusy, herbal, some tree fruit, veg, and flowers. Nothing in terms of specific earthiness to it. There might be a little salinity to it, like, fresh sea spray, but I'm going to see how it is on the palate. I don't know whether it's vintage school or not, but I always make a little noise when I chew and swirl, because I like to connect my sense of smell to my sense of taste. The attack is not a surprise. It's very refreshing. There's saltiness to it actually on the palate. The acidity is, if I want to qualify it, I would say medium plus to high. It's quite mouthwatering, but it doesn't drown out the flavors. This is extremely balanced in terms of the setup of the nose and what I get flavor-wise. There's a little checklist of beautiful lemon lime, fresh lemon lime, fresh herbs, mostly, parsley to me, that bell pepper element, pyrazine, it fades a little bit on the palate. It's not as forthright as primary. Florality, I'm chewing on, fresh flowers. This wine is very interesting in terms of its finish. And this is a personal thing for me. Not only is it long, the flavor swells. So, all things equal, a long finish, especially one that gains steam, is really a mark of quality. It is fresh, it is mouthwatering, it is, I would call it, semi-verging on highly aromatic, both on the nose and the palate. There is a distinct salinity to the flavor. It's in terms of oak, if there is any oak on this, it sure isn't new, or it's faking me out, because sometimes with older barrels it will change the mouthfeel a bit, and especially if there's been extended lees contact, that will add to the richness of the mouthfeel as well. I think that is enough. I go back to the poetic description, at least in my self-serving mind, that the nose is beautifully distinct, but not what I would call loud. I like it a lot, and I would call this fruit forward. So, which grape variety? We have the options of Sauvignon Blanc / blend, which is what? Most of the time going to be Semillon, which does what? It tends to tone down the aromatics of Sauvignon Blanc and maybe add a waxiness to the mouthfeel. Gruner Veltliner, also semi-aromatic, verging on highly, that will have, you know, those savory, famous elements of groovy, like radish, root vegetables and pepper. Torrontés, which is, you know, there should be another word other than highly, like exuberantly aromatic, because it's just like walking through a flower garden or spilling a bottle of perfume. In terms of what regions, we have France to consider for Sauvignon Blanc, but looking down there, it could also come from the New World. This wine is not dictating Europe to me, even though it's got a little bit of the mineral element in terms of the salinity. Gruner Veltliner, let's be honest about it, Austria or nada, and Torrontés would be Argentina. So,
Maddie, just a couple of questions. I'm sorry the slide advanced too fast, and
no, that's okay. I just figure you're not.
I didn't dare to move to do that. But I have a question here from Steve, and Steve, definitely shoot your question out to everyone for the next question. But here it was sent to hosts and panelists. What is the difference between citrus and citrus blossom?
It's a matter of citrus flavors, which can include bitterness from the peel. It is, the primary elements of lime or lemon or grapefruit and the aromatics of it. Blossom to me simply, telegraphs a flower. So that's really the difference. I don't want to overthink it beyond that. There's a difference between the smell of a lemon that you just cut open and the smell of a lime blossom that you just crushed because you couldn't help it as you walked past it, right?
Yeah. I just want to make a note that Evan Goldstein doesn't get to check your answers. It's completely anonymous. So maybe that's why people are holding back. Only
come on, it's anonymous, everybody.
Yeah, only 55% of you have participated. So take a gander, just guess based on these descriptions what you think it is, because part of learning is putting yourself out there. And if you thought it was something else, you can put other and tell us what you think, and everybody will benefit from learning from what you're guessing as well. So
including us, we may not have considered it. So please don't be shy. Actually, the only foolish thing not to do, if you don't mind my editorial comment, is not to jump in. Give it a whirl.
All right. So with that, I see the numbers have gone up to 70%. So I'm going to close this poll, but let's all collectively try to get higher than 70% participation on the poll. I'm going to share the results. And we see that 74% of you thought it was Sauvignon Blanc, 11% at Gruner, and 16% at Torrontés. And then in terms of region, Maddie, we've got 42% on Australia. And if you add up Australia and Argentina, I would say that there was about 68% in this New World area of Argentina and Australia.
And I would love to know if anyone wouldn't mind sharing what their other growing region was. That would be really cool, because I would imagine it would apply to Sauvignon Blanc as opposed to the other grapes. I like this a lot, so I'm greedily taking another sip. Shall we get on our business class ticket on Google Earth and see where we are?
So Maddie will talk a little bit more about the differences in the grapes after we reveal, I guess.
You want me to do it now? I can if you like. Well, I touched on it.
Yeah, I think so. So let's go on to the next slide and reveal first, maybe, and we can talk about it more.
So here we go. We are leaving San Francisco because we always start at Evan's house, as well we should. And we are leaving North America, actually. However, we are going across the Pacific, and we are, yes, indeed, going to end up not in New Zealand, but in Australia, and not in the Southeast, but on the West Coast, in a region I am dying to visit. It's on my bucket list for sure. It is Western Australia, and the vineyards are in the northern part of Western Australia. If you were looking at the moving map, this is an area of the world that's all three sides of this region. Only the fourth one doesn't have a very strong maritime influence, and we're not talking rivers, we're talking oceans. This is an area we always talk about the impact of maritime proximity, but also, frankly, altitude. And this is a growing region that is on the flat side. You know, we are around maybe 300 feet above sea level. However, the winds coming in from both the Indian Ocean and what they call the Southern Ocean as you turn southeast impact this area big time. It must be just like South Africa, that's one long bad hair day. That was my impression of going to South Africa, but beautiful. This is a family owned and operated winery, Howard Park. I just saw that, you know, very much a Garden of Eden image here with the serpent and the tree. Miamup refers to actually a vineyard, or actually, a vineyard area that's north of their most famous vineyard that was named after the owner's dad. This is a Sauvignon Blanc Semillon blend. So Sauvignon Blanc leads. That's the driver. And by the way, I am saying this for no brownie points, but if you haven't gotten around to reading Evan's, you know, 2 or 3 paragraphs that shorthand both the producer, growing region, and the specific wine, do yourself a favor, because they're water in the desert for me. You will notice this is a 2020. Shocker. I don't pay attention to the 2016 on the label. It was just a great example of the label. This is indeed a 2020, and it was harvested in our equivalent of August, which I think is February, but we would, you know, it comes off fresher like a 2021. I would even make the case of 2022. But so to have a Southern Hemisphere white, so show this fresh, is really a testimony to the wine. And it's probably to some degree, I would imagine, a Stelvin closure. I don't know that because I'm staring at the Stelvins on all of our kit wines. Very modern looking winery. Actually looks sort of like mid-century modern. This is about pushing 15% Semillon. So it's a significant amount. Winemaker on the left is not a family member, and the family members are very dynamic and involved. I want to talk about the Semillon in this blend, and the fact that actually a portion of it has been barrel fermented and aged on the lees in older oak, but they make a really specific and kind of cute the way they put it on their tech sheets. Old barrels. You know, 100% used barrels, so absolutely no new oak. So I think you can get the richness of the leaves, but I think it's the significant portion of Semillon that tones down sometimes the excessive, even pushy exuberance of Sauvignon Blanc aromatics. I think it's a really beautiful wine that, you know, don't drive yourself crazy. Oh my God, how am I going to blind taste or deduct Western Australia for Sauvignon Blanc? It's more an issue of clearly that grape variety, perhaps not so clearly, but you know, evident that it is not, in this case, a monovarietal. And if you want to do it in terms of elimination, it's not Upper Loire, Puy-Fumé, or you know, Sancerre. We don't have that strong inorganic minerality, though there's a little bit of saltiness, which makes sense considering where it's located. But nor is it the, you know, tropical fruit jammed into a bottle of New Zealand. I think it's a really beautiful example of an Australian, you know, Southern Hemisphere Sauvignon Blanc with the added complexity of Semillon. And it simply makes me want to visit Margaret River even more.
Evan, did you want to jump in? Look like
No, I was just going to say, if you do find yourself in an area where you're shopping, with maybe whether you're in Margaret River, Sydney, Auckland, New Zealand, anywhere where you find a lot of these wines, there's 2 terms that you will hear used a lot, very vernacularly and without any explanation, because they just presume everybody knows it. One is called SSB and one is called SBS. SSB is when the Semillon is the driver. So it's a Semillon Sauvignon Blanc blend, as opposed to an SBS, which is what we have here, a Sauvignon Blanc Semillon blend. So that genre of wines is amongst the most popular day-to-day wines that you get in restaurants, wine bars, places like that. But those terms are pretty helpful to know. SSB and SBS.
I would also say in terms of deductive conclusions, varietal alone, there is a distinct expression of fresh veg and specifically bell pepper on this. That is the tell, because it's easy.
Which somebody else had, sorry, I just want to mention this. Kevin said pyrazines, and that's what you're referring to.
Yes,
those of you who are not regular listeners, the pyrazine is what Kevin would be referring to, that Maddie's calling bell pepper on here. And I don't know if you saw that in the chat. Kevin says that that's what he thought that was Pinot Gris last night. And then when you mentioned the pyrazine, it was like, click.
Yay. Those click moments are great. They're fun.
Awesome. All right. One question, Evan, for Maddie, is the blending percentage similar to what Bordeaux percentages are for the Semillon, Sauvignon Blanc?
No, as long as
a wide range.
No, literally, if you're 51%, that's the first leading grape variety. Anytime you put grape variety names next to each other, it's just simply by percentage points. So if there's more Semillon, if there's 51% Semillon, it's an SSB. If it's 51% Sauvignon Blanc, it's an SBS, and you would go up from there.
I think the question is blending at 15% a common thing that they do in Bordeaux?
Well, they blend in Bordeaux. They don't tell you anything. I mean, there's no magic percentages. If you're in Graves, Pessac, Lyonnais, and places down in the southwest, which is where you find these Sauvignon Blancs blended, there's no rules or regulations, and it has to be X number of that in this area for white wine grapes. So it's a great question, and the answer, which hopefully will emancipate your angst, is no. Don't worry about it.
And the chateaus do what they want to do.
Yeah. I mean, when you read the books, by the way, and it says it's 85% this or whatever, that's how it's planted. That doesn't necessarily mean how it's blended. So on that lovely note, and by the way, Madeline, I don't know if I picked up like a lot of celery root, sort of that green celery root character there, which I thought was really actually quite compelling. And always difficult to follow Miss Triffon. She's so articulate. All right, so let's move on to wine two. And wine two, again, it's always nice if you've got the ability to not only look at it against a white background, but also relative to the wine you had prior to that. So I'm going to look at my 1 and 2 on white side by side, and I'll notice right off the bat that my wine 2 is a much deeper, more voluminous color than wine number 1. Not only that, it's rich, it's deeper, it's paler. It absorbs a good chunk of light, so it's not quite as reflective. It's not as star brighty brillianty. It's more just really, really bright, and it's probably more pushing sort of a deeper straw yellowish character to it there. The 3 questions I've got for you on the left-hand side, always just things to consider in the back of your mind as you're doing your evaluation. Is this wine dry or fruity? Literally fruity and dry can be different. Sometimes a wine dry just simply means the absence of any sugar. Fruity could be sweet. It could be dry as well too. If it's a fruit-dominated wine, and if there's fruit in here, what kind of fruit dominates? And we'll go into that in just a minute. Is it stone fruit? Is it tree orchard fruit or whatever? And then, as we didn't talk about a little bit, but so important in wine these days, textural is going to give you a sense of lifestyle of the wine, how it's been made, how it's been raised, and ergo perhaps what part of the world, what grape it's from. So just some things to think about. So as I go through this wine, beyond the color, and just again to sort of hold it around and move it, I like to sort of swirl it or roll it and get a sense of, presuming your glass is clean, because it won't work if your glass is anywhere dirty whatsoever. How are the tiers or legs or rivulets forming and falling? And here they're forming pretty slowly, and they're relatively thick, and they're going, I wish I could show you this, but mine are like really slow there. So I'm expecting big wine. In terms of what I look for, I always look for a few things. Those of you who know me know I look for fruit, I look for earth, I look for wood. For me, fruit is a more generic term. I know Tim likes to be more specific. Anything that grows out of the ground hits the fruit category. So a vegetable, it could be a fruit, which your mother would tell you isn't the case, but I'm telling you for wine, it could be herbs, it could be flowers. That's all sort of in there. Earth is, of course, organic or inorganic, and then wood, of course, is there a presence of discernible oak influence or wood influence in the wine. And then there's a few other things we'll touch on later on. So do I get fruit? Absolutely, I get fruit. And I get a good chunk of it here. I would say that in the name, it's very ripe. It's ripe citrusy fruit, so more in the sort of orangey, tangerine-y vein of things. There is certainly lemon there, but it's more Meyer lemony in that knot. Then there's a lot of appley fruit, and again, sort of yellow golden apple as opposed to the green apple that Madeline had. There's a little bit of tropicality in there, most notably in the form of like pineapple. And all of this fruit is super ripe. And even the stuff that's tree-ish or stone-ish verges on the sort of yogurty thing or the custardy thing. It has a little bit of that just sort of really generous textural sense that's there. And baked, like pie fruit also, you know, like you would if you were making a tarte tatin or a crumble or something like that. The next thing we're looking for is earth. And I always say earth is a little bit kind of like pregnancy. You're either pregnant or you're not. You can't be kind of pregnant. It's hard for a wine to be kind of earthy. And the earthiness that I'm getting here is nil. I'm not getting anything organic, stony, minerally, petrally, whatever. And I'm not even getting any real sense of turned soil or compost, turned dirt or anything like that. So I'm going to put a big fat bagel in the middle of my earth note and move on to some wood. And yes, there is wood in this wine. What is the wood coming off of? It's coming off of a combination of things. Part of it is that sort of toasty character. So whether you call it croissant or brioche or baked bread, there's definitely a pie element to it. Like I said before, an apple pie or a peach pie or something like that. Then there's all those sort of sweet spices of which my wife would put a lot of like the vanilla and stuff like that actually into the crust proper, but you could add it onto the fruit. So you get a little bit of baking spice in there. And then just a bit of nuttiness, maybe kind of a marzipan, frangipani kind of thing. But there's definitely a bit of that, maybe even a little bit of like sesame or halava or anything in that kind of vein. And fruit and all of that. So then when we move into that, what else am I getting? We talked about some other things before I saw, because I'm really not good at looking at notes at the same time. I did see a little ML pop up there,
Yeah.
malolactic fermentation. That's sort of that buttered popcorn element that during the process of taking a wine, you make the malic acid convert into lactic acid. Lactic acid like sour cream, yogurt, creme fraiche, as opposed to malic acid, which is hard green apple, kick in the tea stuff. The byproduct of that is diacetyl, which gives you that sort of artificial buttered flavored popcorn. I would
So
say
Evan,
this is good butter. Yeah.
so the question from Arturo was when you had mentioned yogurt,
Mm-hmm.
is that yogurt driven by ML?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yogurt gives you sort of is a lactic thing by nature. Sometimes people will find yogurt. Sometimes people can find an element of sour cream or creme fraiche, literally in the sort of sweet dairied element there. That's usually a bird dog for malolactic. I'm also getting corn, by the way, like fresh summer yellow or white corn when it's still so sweet and wonderful there, and a little bit of that kind of buttered popcorn corn thing. Well, that all works sense. Let's go ahead and taste it. It is rich. It is mouth-filling, which suggests a bigger wine. Remember the legs rivulated down pretty slowly before. It's confirming to me in the palate, both in its full body and the fact that my chest cavity feels like a jack-o'-lantern and it ain't Halloween yet. So you're getting that richness there. It's a big round, but texturally, remember that third question there. It's round, it's creamy, it's buttery. So that's probably not only a suggestion of probably some barrel aging, because barrel aging will round out a wine, as Madeline said before with the Semillon. It'll also give you texture, and then if you do ML, you're doing that. So that sort of speaks to a genre and a style of wines. And what choices do we have here, Li-Meng, to pick from? Well, let's see what we could do. We could do Chardonnay or Chardonnay. Chardonnay if you're on the East Coast. Maybe you're a person in Massachusetts or something, right? You could do Chenin Blanc. Chenin Blanc does have a lot of that sort of bright, particularly appley fruit. Chardonnay can have lots of different things going on. Grenache Blanc, or a blend. Grenache is a fairly neutral grape too, as is Chardonnay, and it's a lot of the production things that you do onto it that could do that, or it could be other. And then in terms of matching the countries to the grapes, well, France could be Grenache. It could actually be all three of those grapes. Spain would probably be mostly Garnacha Blanca or Chardonnay. South Africa does a little bit of all of them, but probably we think mostly of the first two grape varieties. And in California, hell, we do everything all the time anywhere. So you've got lots of choices and lots of things to think about, but think about what we talked about. Think about not only the flavors, but the texture, the causes of those things that we talked about, and make a good educated guess there. No, I'm not grading you, as Li-Meng said.
Yeah, and Evan, here's a good question. Tim answered this also, but I want to get your perspective on it. Deepu asked, she's more used to, or Deepu is more used to earthiness in red wines. Is earthiness present in white wines?
Oh, absolutely. And I would even venture to suspect that because you don't have the tannins, you don't have the big red fruit, you don't have oftentimes a lot of the oak that comes with those red wines. In many cases, the minerality or earthiness of the wine will come through even more because there's less for it to hide behind. And generally, white wines come from cooler climates, and cooler climates will stress the earthy elements of the wine more than super warm fruit. You come from a warm area, warmer climate, the riper the fruit, generally the lesser the expression of that terroir and minerality.
Yeah. You folks are thinking too hard. The ones who are not, we're still not at 70%. But I am going to ask one more question to give those of you who are needing a little bit more time. What do you think of the acidity, Arturo asks, on this wine, Evan?
Oh, this is not nearly as shrill as Madeline's wine was. I mean, she had some really serious, bright, refreshing, crunchy acid. This year's got it's not like medium, so it's not like perfectly balanced. It pushes a little. I'd say it's probably somewhere between medium and medium plus. Probably lean slightly more towards medium plus because it's got in the words of the Beatles album, you got to carry that weight, right? So you've got a little bit of there. So I'd say probably medium plus. I would say the alcohol here is probably high. I would say it's softly phenolic or tannic, if you will. Tannin in white wines is called phenols, and that's probably due to the oak on that, and a little bit of a preponderance of some newer oak that's in there. But we'll see when we find out what it is.
Great. All right, I'm going to end the poll, and thank you very much, guys. We're at 73%. We did a little better. We're at 95% Chardonnay, 5% Grenache Blanc. No one thought it was Chenin. And then we're at 74% California. So, Evan, we still have 16% in France. Maybe we talk about why it's not France?
Yeah, well, I think a couple of things. First of all, the areas where Chardonnay are grown in France, with the exception of a super heat wave, you're not going to get that generous a level of alcohol. And ergo, you're going to have a much brighter level of acidity. So this would be a bit heavy, a bit cumbersome for a French style quality Chardonnay, and probably would suggest you more of a warmer place of origin there. The Grenache Blanc call is not actually a bad call. The only thing that probably makes it less Grenache Blanc, which would have that weight, that texture, and probably a similar level of acidity, would be that you probably wouldn't put so much oak on it because it would dominate the element there, and all you would taste is oak. And I think there's enough fruit here coming through that probably suggests that it's not Grenache Blanc. So, but it looks like it's a pretty much of a softball for everybody here. Most people took their wiffle bat and just whacked it, and as we'll find out momentarily, it's a good call.
All right. So,
all right, let's leave the three-sided monster that is Margaret River with water on all the sides. Beautiful part. I too want to go to Margaret River, Madeline. Maybe we can do a field trip. And as we get up in the plane and we go quickly to 30,000, 38,000 feet, and we're going to leave. We're going to move to back. We're going to stay in the sort of non-European part of the world, but we're going to go back to where we came from. And no, that's not I'm making basement in my cellar in San Francisco. However, we are going to stay in NorCal, and we are going to go up to the Napa Valley, and we're going to go to visit my compadres over at Freemark Abbey, which is right in the heart of the Napa Valley, and truly a classic in that regard. It's so nice. I just was in Spain on not literally. I was teaching a class on Spanish wines the other day, and we were talking a lot about classic wines and whether it's Jerez from sherry or whether it's from Rioja or things like that. Sometimes we want to always look for the shiny new toy, and sometimes you should look at what you got. It's what is it? Shop in your closet. Don't go buy new clothes. And I think sometimes the same thing except for wine. So this is a Chardonnay from Napa Valley. And it's right in the heart of it. The winery itself is on further north on Highway 29, but the vineyard sourcing for this is pretty much all south, which makes sense because the further north you get into Napa Valley, moving towards Calistoga, it gets pretty warm and a little bit too warm to grow Chardonnay. So you need to find either mountains, higher altitude places to grow Chardonnay, or cooler areas closer to the bay, most notably in southern Napa or Carneros, or perhaps as far north as Yountville. After that, it gets a bit warm and you move from cool climate white grapes to longer. So this is from Freemark Abbey. Freemark Abbey is truly a classic and I would say really relevant winery. If you look here on the label, and I'm going to tell you it on too, it was established back in 1886. That made it bonded winery number 17,
Wow.
actually 16 rather, in the state of California. It is a classic, and the fact that they're still around today suggests to you that they're not new. They're not out of business, and yet they're still here and doing a really good job. When I like so many things about this winery. One, from those people who are history buffs, back in 1886, the owner and winemaker were the same person, and she was a woman. She was the first female winemaker in the state of California, Josephine
Wow.
Tyson, back in 1886. She sold the winery to a bunch of partners after that who have subsequently sold it a number of times, but it's always been a relevant winery. For those of you who follow that fab Judgment of Paris tasting that happened with Stephen Spurrier back in 1976, Freemark Abbey was the only winery that had both a white and a red Chardonnay and Cabernet in that tasting. And the Chardonnay and Cabernet both did very well. They didn't win, but they both did very, very well. And when they did a redo of this same tasting in Tokyo back in 2017, the Cabernet won. It was the number one wine of the day. In 1949, they created one of the first tasting rooms there. So this is a winery that's always been very much a pioneer and a forward-thinking winery. Yes, as you can see by the label, it is 14.5 alcohol. So if you are feeling like a jack-o'-lantern, you are correct on that one. And what else can I tell you? 40% new oak, 45% older oak, one-use oak, and then the balance in stainless steel, which gives you that heavy oaky thing going on, the newness of over almost half the oak being that case. And there you got it. 3 vineyards in the Carneros area. I should say 2 in Carneros, 1 just off of Huachica Creek in southern Napa Valley. And that's the winery. You've probably driven by it a million times before. For those of you who've been to Napa, that's Christy Melton, who is the second female winemaker for this winery. And she took over a handful of years ago and has just been doing an awesome job. I mean, I think Freemark's wines are better than they've ever been since probably, gosh, when they were doing Cabernet Bauchet, the Bauchet vineyard in the late 70s, and probably the best Chardonnays they've ever been.
So for those of you who have a novice palate like mine, not like these 3 over here, one thing that I really appreciate is I really hope you're tasting with 6 glasses in front of you. Because if you go back and forth between wine number 1 and wine number 2, you're getting the oak, no oak. You're getting the ML, no ML type of difference. It's pretty remarkable, Evan, to be able to do the comparison like that. And we put, sometimes Evan and I get these questions from folks going, why do you guys use such a big bottle of 187 ml? Well, so you could go back and taste and retaste and maybe put the rest in your fridge if you've got any left and taste tomorrow. There's a lot of fun in learning that way. Maddie?
Also, you can share. Don't forget these kits. And, seriously, you can be greedy, keep the whole thing to yourself. But if you're using it for, deductive tasting purposes, they're so shareable. I just want to opine in terms of the quality of this wine. If you integrate everything that Evan said, but it's in the glass. Yes, there's alcohol. Yes, there's oak. Yes, there's mallow. But you're not pushed to draw those elements apart. It creates a beautiful, cohesive whole that is memorizable as a great example of Napa Chardonnay. And I'm glad that most of you didn't doubt yourselves. Yay.
I love that Adam and Rachel are sharing as husband and wife. That is a very, very good thing that you share. And I'm going to make a plug for something later on. Madeline asked us to produce testable, examinable wine kits with textbook wines like this. This is an example of a wine that would be in those kinds of kits where it's Napa, Chardonnay, and exactly what you would expect from a Napa Chardonnay. Without further ado, wine number 3, Tim, we'll hear from you now.
Okay, thanks, Lee Meng. Everybody, so wine number 3, first red wine. And let's take a look at these questions first. First up, what about the wine step, the color? What does that tell you about the possible grape variety or grape varieties, plural? And then what are the most important non-fruit aromas and flavors, which can really be a tell to help you identify the grape variety? And then how is the wine's climate of origin, where the grapes are grown? How's that reflected in the structure? That's really going to come into play with this particular wine. Okay, let's get started. As you tilt your glass forward, the wine is clear so you can read through it. That's, a thinner skin, lighter pigmented red grape. The color is a really true ruby red, and it's a youthful color. It lightens up to a pinkish type rim. And anything else about it? The layers, the legs, tears, viscosity, etc. As I wait, well, it's high, right? So I'm expecting a pretty rich wine, and we'll see if that holds true. All right, on the nose, everybody, please smell it. Okay, it smells delicious, first of all. The fruit is predominantly red, so things like strawberry, kind of like bean cherry, red raspberry, and here it's ripe and fresh. There is some black fruit too, things like blackberry, black plum, and maybe black raspberry, but once again, they're ripe and they're fresh. And I just wanted to make a real quick connection between the color of the wine and the fresh quality of the fruit, and that usually holds true. Other things, if you pull your nose out of the glass a little bit, the wine is floral. There's some really pretty rose and jasmine notes, and they are fresh also. And then there's some greenish herbal type things. For me, most notably, some tea and bergamot, and maybe a little chive and chervil. And moving on from there are things like anise, maybe some red licorice, almost a little gingery spiciness, and that could be the oak. The wine is earthy. And it's not only earthy, it's minerally. It's turned soil, it's mushroom, it's leaves, it's clay, and there's a dusty quality to it as well. And then finally, in terms of the nose, there's definitely some oak, but it's very low usage here. And I would say there's light spice, there's a little bit of walnut and cashew type oxidation. Yeah, and that's about it. All right, so everybody taste it, please. All right, there's something definitely on the palate I didn't smell. We're going to get to it in a second. Notice, as usual, the red wine that it tartans up on the palate. So practically everything I was talking about is there in terms of the fruit, but instead of being ripe and fresh, it's tart and fresh. So here the bean cherry becomes sour cherry. We got red raspberry, maybe some cranberry. The strawberries are underripe. And the black fruit is very high-toned and acidic, like blackberries and black raspberries. So again, tart, but again, fresh. So again, youthful. What else? That tea leaf, the rose, the bergamot, anise, little ginger spice. What else about it? The thing that, that really I tasted right away is that there's a stemmy quality to the wine. Okay, so that speaks to either partial whole cluster fermentation or all whole cluster. And it really doesn't matter which. The fact of the matter is some of the fruit that went into this was on whole clusters, and you have stems, and if you ferment it with stems, you're obviously going to get stem tannin. And that, to me, by the way, is middle palate after the fruit, and it's kind of it reminds me of chewing on a twig when you were a kid. And yes, I was weird and I did that. And you're not surprised. Tell me you're not surprised. Okay. The wine's even earthier on the palate, and turn soil and mushroom, things like that. And then the wine is chalky and dusty. Yeah, oak usage is definitely there. It's smoke and toast and very light spice. So again, used oak. Some thoughts on that. Again, this is not a wine of hugely high pedigree and expense. So we've got a wine here with some used oak on it. Okay, let's taste it again for structure. So as you're turning, taste it. Hold it in your mouth for about 3 to 5 seconds and then spit it out. The first thing I do is check for acid. Salivary glands is elevated. They're working. So the acid is medium plus. Now that everybody has either swallowed, and it's Friday, so you may not be spitting, catch and release where you are. I'd understand, right? It's Friday evening. So once you do, though, take a breath, say oh and inhale. And I feel heat here. And so, and that connects the dots in terms of the alcohol and the legs and the tears and how slow they were. Yep. So the alcohol's high, the finish is long, the tannins are moderate, they're very soft. And what else? That complexity is medium plus. It's a really well-made wine. I think it's a delight. It's very well balanced. And the length is, medium plus. Okay. Kevin said, this wine needs some barbecue. Kevin, I think this could be just a moment in the glass. I think this goes well with anything, but barbecue sounds very good right now. Okay, your choices are Gamay, Pinot Noir, and Grenache Blanc for possible grape varieties, or the notorious other. And then your regions are France, Spain, Australia, and New Zealand. And Li Meng, do you want me to just say a bit about these grapes or move on and do it after?
No, I think you should say a little bit about these grapes, especially since our first red wine.
Okay, so everybody, if I'm looking at Gamay and classic Gamay, I'm looking for some carbonic maceration and stem inclusion. So I don't have the tutti frutti carbonic, Jolly Rancher candy thing. I do have the stem inclusion, but I'm lacking all that artificial candy type fruit. The wine also is higher in alcohol, and it's not even the right, young, almost bluish ruby color that carbonic maceration brings. Pinot Noir, not a bad guess because of the tannin level. The only thing here that to me to consider is that the wine's quite earthy, the alcohol is elevated. So you're going to have to work with that. And then finally, Grenache blend, to me, the really ripe red fruit might take you there. What's missing is all the pepper, the rotundone, but also all the savory stuff, what Maddie calls the Jimmy Dean sausage thing. And all that's missing here. So with that, let's see what we have, Lena.
All right, I'm gonna let everyone go through. Maybe it's the first red wine, so we're back down to under 70%. And folks are kind of going, I would say it's about 50-40 French, Spain versus New Zealand, Australia. Can you help out a little bit on that region?
Well, let's face it, your big, decision here on origin is the wine earthy enough to take you to Europe or not? Okay, that's really the thing. And here, I mean, the disconnect for here, and we have to allow for this now in the age of climate change, is that you do have some really warm vintages, wherever they are, right? But the wine to me is really earthy and minerally at the same time. So that is going to take me to Old World in Europe, okay? Versus the New World, because you think about those, the Chardonnay and Evan's point about it being a bagel in terms of earth and mineral. All right, so we've got lots of people going for Pinot Noir, and that's great because of the soft tannins and the color. People are in France, Spain a little bit, probably for Grenache, as in Garnacha, and then possibly Australia, New Zealand, both places that make really beautiful Pinot Noirs. But let's jump on Evan's private jet. And let's see where it takes us. Going from Napa Valley, are we going to need our comforters? Are we going to need, little overnight action? And I think we will.
And I guess as we're going through this, Pinot was a very big number. So if you went Grenache, could you see how some people would have gone to Grenache, and why not?
Well, okay, so Grenache, like I said, Grenache because of the ripe fruit, but the ripe fruit kind of tartaned up on the palate. But everybody, remember what I said, there's no pepper and there's no savory, sanguine, meaty Jimmy Dean thing going. That's completely missing. So you can't go to Grenache with it, okay? You might be able to go there if it was from Australia, in which case it would probably be minty and eucalyptusy. Here we are. We are in the Côte Chalonnaise. We are in southern Burgundy, a very hilly, pretty place. In fact, I saw it in May. And we are at a small domain in Mercure, which is in the Chalonnaise, and it's called Château de Chimari. And the Deviard family, it's a brother-sister named Amaury and Aurora. Their family has owned this since the late 17th century. That's when the chateau was built. It was renovated in 1933 and 34, and it produced its first vintage in the newish chateau in 1934. The family also owns properties in Nuit Saint-Georges, in Givry, and Puy-Puissé. Total production is about 10,000 cases a year. So this is made from 10 separate plots in Mercure. And, you know, in the grand scheme of things, of how expensive Burgundy is, and expensive doesn't even do it justice, how prohibitively expensive, you know, the Mercury is still, to me, a really good deal if it exists. It's such a thing exists in red Burgundy. And certainly, you know, if you're a restaurant buyer, this is one wine you look for. And certainly from a chateau like this, a family-owned domain, and this is made from 10 separate plots. 3 of them are Premier Cru, organic farming, hand harvesting small lots in terms of open top fermenters, natural yeast fermentation. Yeah, all good stuff. And again, total production for the chateau is about 10,000 cases and about 4,000 cases of this, the red. I really like this wine for its density, its depth, and yet its value. And yeah, to me, Mercury is something I look for in the market.
Yep.
Extinguished colleagues, what do you think?
I served this wine last night at a tasting of, you're going to love this. This is my Gracie Tier George. I served this wine last night at a tasting, a strolling tasting called Beautiful Accessible, meaning affordable Burgundy. And
Nice.
it was next to Bourgogne Rouge from Drouin. But I think it's just shockingly good for the money. And Burgundy prices are crazed right now, both white and red. So just wanted to add that enthusiasm in.
No, yeah, that's Amaury. That's the brother and sister and the winemaker. You know, I think they do a fantastic job. Yeah.
Awesome.
You know, we had some questions, Li Meng. Do you want me to address these?
I think that there was some comments about Beaujolais
Yeah.
Versus Grenache, which you answered the Grenache part. Maybe the Beaujolais one is a good one to answer because Gamay, Pinot sometimes get confusing.
Well, they can be, and that's a really good point Arturo to bring up. So, you know, as I mentioned, Beaujolais Village is a lighter wine. It's usually about 13% alcohol. You've got a carbonic maceration, which smells very candied, very artificial, very pretty. And then you've got the stem inclusion, and the wines are dry. They're acidic. They're very mineral driven, but they're just not as big as this wine. And also probably you're just not going to get oak like this.
What about Nebbiolo, Tim? What do you think of Nebbiolo as a call?
Nebbiolo, by comparison, is like a middle linebacker. Okay, it is a bigger wine. It's more acidic, more tannic, and just higher in alcohol. And it's just a very intense, focused, earth-driven wine, and also very floral. And I would expect it to show more, involvement in the color, but it's just a more tannic wine.
And Tim, do you usually get smokiness from Pinot? Because Kevin's got a point here. He didn't think it was Pinot because he didn't get strong smokiness, but is smokiness?
Smokiness, Kevin, in a good way, is not smoke taint. Smokiness comes from oak. It doesn't come from grapes. Yeah. So if you're smelling smokiness in a wine, you're smelling the oak, and probably very expensive oak. Pinot Noir to me is very pure. If it's, traditional Pinot Noir, it's red fruit. It's got, moderate plus acidity. It's got very soft tannins. I'm
going to throw this question to Evan, actually. Deepu has a good question about, it's becoming more difficult for me to distinguish some Burgundies from leaner versions of US and Australian Pinot Noirs. This one seems less typically Burgundy. Wondering if I'm not just tasting right. Evan, what do you think of that comment?
It's a good comment, and it's a very fair observation. The world is coming together in a lot more places. Whether you call it philosophy, whether you call it winemaking interpretation, whether you call it climate change, whether you call it one of the things, the hard lines that used to delineate stuff for a lot of us have sort of gotten very hazy, very, very gray. So if you're finding it's harder to distinguish between Burgundy and, say, Oregon or cool climate California or New Zealand Central Otago or Chilean Casablanca or whatever, you're not alone. I mean, that's true for everybody out there. What I do think about this one is that this is not. I mean, we've had a couple of Burgundies of late. I think we had a couple of big Burgundies, I remember recently, and those were just also in part vintage. That was there that drove that style, but also as Tim pointed out, we're in a particular area of Burgundy called the Côte Chalonnaise. This sits below the Côte d'Or, but north of the Mâconnais. And the style of Pinots that are made there, whether they're from Givry or Mercury or wherever, tend to be more live. They tend to be more elegant. They tend to be a little bit more ballerina-esque and not quite as powerful. This is not, Pommard. This is not Von Romanet. This is not that. It's partially its soil, partially its exposure. There's a number of other things, but this is fairly. If you were to taste a bunch of Mercuries side by side, they would taste very much like this. They would be more elegant and ballerina, if you will, and not so much, bigger and denser.
Yeah. Great. I just want to highlight this point, Kevin. Don't feel awful about not getting these wines. Enjoyment is absolutely the point.
Can I tag team on the Beaujolais thing that Tim did so nicely? Because I taste a lot of Cru Beaujolais. It is not uncommon for Cru Beaujolais to use, traditional Burgundian winemaking and use very little, if any, carbonic. So, there's not a disconnect, but there's a progression between Beaujolais, Beaujolais Village, and Cru, and it really depends on the grower. So sometimes in determining whether it's Gamay or Pinot, there may be other elements that Tim described, as opposed to just the simple, carbonic tell. Just adding another layer. And Kevin, I got to tell you, I spent the first 10 years of my career answering the question, is this good wine? And then I had about 5 minutes to determine what is it when I was invited to take the MS exam. And to this day, it still ties me a knot. So no worries.
Yeah. And it is very difficult without you guys giving us the hints. I concur on what Bill is saying. On that note, Tim, I'm going to have you take wine 4, please.
Okay, thanks, Li Peng. So everybody pick up glass number 4. Not only is it deep in color, but you're taking a look at the color. And this points to the first question up on the slide. What does the color of the wine suggest about its age or use of oak? Because the color here is not only ruby red, but it's also garnet. So it's a more evolved color. And that could be the wine's overall age or the fact that it spent time in oak. And we'll find out. How's the wine's climate of origin reflected by its structure? Always important. And we'll be able to compare this again to the Pinot Noir we just tasted. And then how would you describe the quality of the tannins? Are they harsh? Are they astringent? Are they smooth? Are they supple? Et cetera, et cetera. And then ask yourself why. And we'll talk about that. Okay. On the site, the wine is again probably close to deep ruby with garnet. It lightens up to a lighter ruby garnet rim. And what else about it? There's really no staining of the tears. And the tears, legs, Marangoni effect, all that good stuff is medium plus. Just notice that it's faster than the previous wine. Okay. And then on the nose, take a moment to smell it. Okay. Many things happen very quickly. First of all, my comment about the wine's color, it being, and the wine having possibly spent time in oak, and then probably being older, they're both true. Okay. And the first thing that comes up is the wine is both red and black in terms of fruit. But the fruit quality here for both is kind of ripe and dried. And so the red fruit here is predominantly red plums, red cherries, maybe some craisins, and everything about it is ripe and dried. Excuse me. The black fruit is, again, black plums and black cherries, and once again, really ripe and dried. There's floral, as you pull your nose out of the glass, and keeping in with the theme that we've already set between the color of the wine being advanced and the overall character of the wine being evolved, floral is dry. So it's dried roses and maybe some lavender, maybe even potpourri, because it's a little spicy. And then in terms of the non-fruit, there are green vegetable things like savory herbs, but they're all dry. And maybe even some dark leafy greens. There's brown mushrooms. There's some yellow, dried yellow and red peppers. And there's even some sun-dried tomatoes. So again, everything about the wine speaks to evolution and time and oak. And we'll get to the oak in just a second. Again, some herbs. There's black licorice. And then the earth, the wine's pretty profoundly earthy. I would think even more than the previous wine, the Burgundy. It is soil. It reminds me of sun-baked terracotta, some sun-baked clay, and there's really dusty, rocky. And then other things about the age that speak are there's a leathery quality of the wine. That's a common thing you get for red wine with some age. And then there's considerable oak usage. In fact, I would say it's fairly high. And we've got lots of things going on for the oak. So there's, there's the spices, there's a toastiness, there's a pronounced vanilla character, there's some dill here, kind of cedary, almost cigar box. And then in terms of oxidation, there's walnut, there's marzipan, things like that. All right. So, again, we've got considerable oak usage here, but pay attention to certain aromas and flavors with it. All right. Let's taste it, please. Okay. It's interesting because it's kind of a deceptive wine. Really tartans up on the palate, everything about it. So now it becomes all dried and tart fruit, most of it red. It's cranberry. It's actually a little bitter. What else about it? The floral is there. It's kind of like potpourri and lavender that are dried. It's profoundly earthy. It's like that terracotta baked earth quality, but also chalky and dusty at the same time. And there's that dried green herb note that goes all the way through the middle. And then the oak really dominates the finish of the wine, right? But it doesn't dominate the character. The end is all sawdusty, dill, toasty, spicy, yeah. And then that bitter walnut finish, which is the oak. In terms of the structure, go ahead and taste it again. Okay, I'm sure the first time you tasted this, you noted the difference between it and the previous wine. The structure is it's more linear. It's not as big a wine. The alcohol is medium. The acid is medium plus plus. The tannins are medium plus. They're a little gritty on the finish. And that's probably because of a long time in oak. We'll find out. And the finish is long. And I think the wine is high complexity. It's really quite good. Okay. What do we have for a poll, Li Meng?
All right. I'm going to release this poll.
So here we go. Here are your possibilities. We have Malbec and blend, Cabernet Sauvignon and blend, Tempranillo and blend, country region type choices, France, Spain, California, and Argentina. Okay. So, going back to the grapes, all right, we've got two Cabernet family grapes next to each other. We've got Malbec. And Malbec, to me, the color is usually purple and it's very, very opaque and saturated type color and not usually very earthy. We've got a little green quality, very floral. And then Cabernet, of course, to me is tannins, lots of tannins. And it's usually a bigger, richer wine. And then the Tempranillo, to me, is a thinner skinned grape. That tends to have a lot of non-fruit herbal and floral type qualities and can be really quite earthy. Your choices are France, if you want to go to Europe, and Spain, California and Argentina, and certainly Argentina for Malbec, California for Cabernet Sauvignon. Okay, really a complex wine. Yeah, and to me, a wine that in the glass is going to keep changing over the next several hours, if you have the patience not to drink it all.
Tim, this wine is making me hungry.
Yes.
It's got that delicious, that acidity. The balance is amazing on it. I love this wine.
Yeah.
It's a great wine. I love also how fast people are to respond now. It usually takes a few wines, but now we're already up to 73% of folks entering in your choices. So I'm going to give you guys another minute or another few seconds, I should say, so that we can get on to revealing this. And in terms of where people are regionally, I think there's a very clear winner. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll right now and launch the results. We have 85% of folks in Tempranillo, and 85% of that, therefore, I think, picking Spain. And the rest of them are in New World territory, California and Argentina. So, Tim, you want to talk a little bit about why not the newer world areas while we fly over to the reveal?
Yeah, good question. Again, the wine is, to me, profoundly earthy and minerally at the same time. It's certainly not tannic enough to be Cabernet. And I'd even say, just the dark fruit qualities and the color from Malbec, it's just not there. So yeah, let's hop on Evan's plane again. This time we don't have to go too far. In fact, we could fly from Burgundy and go have lunch here. It's maybe 90 minutes away. Piece of cake, right?
And
So
I love the question from the comment from Kevin saying that he likes the multiple choice. I should tell you that if you did the quick picks, when you do start tasting, you do have those multiple choices available to you. Or if you do the full workout, it's under the hints section when you have the question mark for hints. So those 4 choices, sometimes a little bit different choices, are available to you on our grid as well. Sorry, Tim.
All right, so we've landed just outside Logroño in Rioja in Spain, and this is indeed a Reserva Rioja, and it's from a small family-owned domain called Bujanda. And Viña Bujanda is actually relatively recent in terms of the industry there because it was only founded in 2009. However, that said, the family, and this once again, this is a brother-sister team, that's Carlos and Pilar Martinez Bujanda Ibarria. And their family has been making wine since 1889. So this is in a small village that's called Ollón near Logroño. It's a relatively new domain, but obviously the vineyards have been in the family, some of them for over a century. And the vineyards are in Rioja Alta and Rioja Alavesa. So they're relatively speaking high altitude. They're about 1,400 feet. And here they're chalk and clay and marl. And you only find the chalk in limestone soils in Rioja Alavesa. And what else about it? Well, it's very old school traditional Rioja in that they're using a mix of predominantly American oak barriques, but also French oak. And that makes itself known, of course, as the dill and coconut and bourbon notes that are on the nose and the palate. What else about it? It spent 20 months and in 30% new and then the rest mixed. But you can see, the style is unmistakable for traditional Rioja. Otherwise than that, the fruit is all organically grown, sustainably harvested, again, fermented in smaller lots and then aged for 20 months and then a further year in bottle before release. So to me, this is, if this wine would definitely be a candidate in one of Maddie's kits because this is slam dunk for Reserva Rioja. Matthew, I'm going to ask you Matthew's question. How do you explain the darker color for Tempranillo? Probably the vintage. Could be, extended maceration. In fact, they do a week of cold soak before they actually start primary fermentation. So that could explain it. But at the same time, the quality of the fruit. And that's a great picture to interrupt myself because look at the color of the soil. It's white. So you've got chalk and limestone soils in Rioja. And I said Alavesa a few moments ago, and that's wrong. It's actually Rioja Alta that has the chalk and limestone soils. Okay. So Bill, as your attorney, you need to have a Malbec next to Rioja because it's kind of like Elvis and Beyonce singing at the same time. Once you see them together, you won't forget. Okay.
Tim, I want to hear more about this lunch we're going to have, leaving from where? Bordeaux and flying into Logroño. I'm just saying, I didn't know that was the kind of life you lead.
That would be a good
lunch.
lunch.
My dreams, Maddie, at the moment. Yeah. Yeah. But
it's a great value, isn't it, Tim?
Oh, it is. Absolutely. Yeah. So
Rioja
Rioja generally is
is
just a great value.
Always a good value. Yeah.
Yeah. What I love about the vintages, for those of you, we're ping ponging so much, just realize that here in the selection that our team has made, the 2016, it's interesting to be able to taste older vintages against, the 2020, the 2019 and all that. It's really fun, I think, Evan, very educational for us to be able to learn vintages. And I know it sounds like I'm like realizing what these wines are for the first time. Part of the reason is because we go through so many wines. I literally forget what's in our kits, and then I taste along with you guys, and it's like, wow, this is really amazing. What is the current release for Rioja Reserva? And I would just throw in there current release for Rioja Reserva or Gran Reserva, Evan.
Well, it's going to vary winery to winery. They give you suggested times, like it has to spend X amount of time in barrel, it has to spend a minimum of X amount of time in bottle, but you can interpret that however you want. If you remember, we had an Alberto Orte Crianza wine a couple of kits ago that was a 2013, and that was the current vintage. So a lot of it is going to be up to the individual house. There are basic minimums of barrel and bottle age that you have to follow by category. So Genérico, which is the unoak category, to the Crianza, which is some oak, to Reserva, to Gran Reserva. But in terms of the release time, that's individually up to the individual winery. So this would be this winery's current release.
Yeah, so this 2016 is the current vintage that we purchased.
For Viña Bujanda, correct.
Okay, great, perfect.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question, Rebecca. Okay, wine
All
number
right.
5.
I want to give Maddie some time on her last wine, so I'm not going to race through this one. Nevertheless, you guys know the formula and all of that. I think the questions are pretty explanatory vis-a-vis red, blue, and black fruits, the quality of earthiness, and then if oak is a player in this wine or not. So let's go ahead and give it a look. The color here is semi-translucent, which is to say it has some volume of color, but it's not deep, it's not rich, it's not opaque by any stretch of the imagination. I put it sort of a kind of clear, lighter to medium ruby, maybe a slight pinkish tinge at the end. Pink, purples, and blues usually give you a sense of youth in a wine when you see that color at the edge of the glass. When I swirl it around, the alcohol seems to be moderate. You know, I'm getting some formation of tears falling. My glasses are clean and all that. But again, I'm not going to jump to too many conclusions ahead of time. Let's go ahead and give it a sniff and focus on the fruit earth wood. Right off the bat, I'm getting fruit. Well, I'm not going to say it's Hawaiian punch by any stretch of the imagination. There is an exuberance to the nature of the fruit here. And as Tim sort of eloquently articulated the nature of red fruits prior to that, I would definitely give this one some raspberry. I'd give it some cherry. I'd give it perhaps even a crunchiness of cranberry or something like that. Strawberry there. There is a black fruit element to it too, but it's not quite as ripe. So as Tim again articulated earlier, black raspberry, blackberry, perhaps slightly unripe. They should have picked them a couple of weeks later. Cherries and things like that. No currant, no cassis, anything like that. As far as earth goes, maybe a very soft element of some turned dirt character, but I'm not getting strong mineral. I'm not getting strong organic or rather inorganic earth at all, which again sort of gets me to thinking about the ripeness of the fruit nature and where fruit gets riper versus where it doesn't. As far as wood goes, wood is here. For sure, but it's not a like key element of the wine. So to look at that third question, is it a key element of the wine? No. Was it a key element of the wine I talked to you guys about earlier in wine 2? Abso-frickin-lutely. So think about that in terms of the types of grapes that crave, want, or find themselves with larger quantities of smaller and or newer oak, and this wine definitely is not it. Other than that, am I getting other elements besides the fruit characters? Certainly some floral elements here, maybe a hint of lavender. In the wine, there's a little bit of fennel character to this wine. There's a little bit of an olive character to this wine, a little bit of an herbal character, kind of softly rosemary-ish or marjoram-ish there. And maybe in the back, I'm swirling. Let's go ahead and give it a taste too. Sometimes when you taste, it confirms what you smell. Oftentimes it does. There's definitely pepperiness here to it, but I wouldn't call this cracked black pepper. I would put this more in the realm of like green peppercorns, like the stuff that you make for steak au poivre, or even pink peppercorns or something like that. So peppery, but it's not that sort of harsh, strong peppery note. There's a sort of rose petal character that comes out in the palate as you breathe back through, but there's a lot going on here. Now, structurally, what do we got? Do we have acid? Yes, we have acid. The acid, I would say, is probably somewhere around medium plus. Is there weight to the wine? ergo alcohol. Yes, I would probably also put that in the realm of medium plus. Tannin, red wine, we've got to talk about that. Is there a lot of tannin here? Answer is yes, there's tannin, but it's really well managed, almost sort of soft, velvety, creamy tannin to it. So none of the astringency, none of the bitterness, none of the harshness, which leads you to either believe of a really good winemaker, a variety that is not super tannic to begin with, or a combination of both. And I'd say it's probably somewhere in that middle. It's long, it's subtle, it's elegant in its own way, and not necessarily flashy. To quote Madeline's quiet versus loud, this is probably more of somewhere on the quiet plus. It's not a loud wine by any stretch of the imagination, and a lot going on. Very, very intricate. All right, what could we have here? Well, from a grape standpoint, we've got a couple of choices for you that will pop up on the screen. It could be Barbera. That's Barbera, not Barbara. Barbara's my wife. Barbera is a grape. Barbera is a grape that we see not only in northern Italy, in the Piedmont area, but we've seen it in California. It's usually known for very dense, almost sort of purpley color to it, as is Gamay, I might add. And I would say both of these are probably not striking out there. Grenache. To me, it's interesting. Philippe Combier, the late incredible vintner down in the Southern Rhone, used to call Grenache the Pinot Noir of the Rhone Valley. And I think he's got some things to be said about that in terms of the structures, the tannins, and things like that. Could be some other grapes in there. As far as region goes, Italy clearly with our Barbera. French could be our Gamay and or Grenache. Washington could be any of those grapes, and Chile probably would focus more on the Grenache than anything else, although there are small amounts of Barbera planted. They're relatively minuscule.
Evan, there's an interesting question here. Tim answered the first part of it, which is, what's the difference between fennel and anise? And is anise more of a fresh scent? And Tim answered it really well. Fennel is more vegetal and anise is more of a red licorice. But the question I want to pose as an add-on to that is, does it matter as a marker? Is fennel or anise a marker in this case for you, or is it just more of a description?
No, it's a little bit. It's a little bit. It's probably more of a descriptor. I mean, I have the luxury of knowing what the wine is, so that's kind of leading the witness a bit. I would say it's certainly inherent to this grape variety in certain parts of the world, and this is one of the places where you do have it. But your choice, by the way, grapefruit versus this versus that. One person's anise is another person's fennel. I would concur with, when I say fennel, I'm usually referring more to the bulb, the root thing that we actually cook there, whereas anise can be more licorice. It could be powdered anise. It could be anise seed. There could be a number of other ways there. So that speaks more to the spice element of anise, whereas fennel speaks specifically to the bulb, to the vegetable.
Yeah. I think, Evan, as we travel, one thing that might be interesting to talk about, because there is a bit of confusion on this particular wine. It's about 60-40 Italy, France versus Washington, Chile. So how can we help folks here sort of go one way or the other? And I can see also from the varieties, we've got 60% on Grenache, but a 15-25 on Gamay and Barbera.
Well, I would eliminate two of the varieties, and I kind of led the witness earlier by virtue of color. And this is one of the things that we don't spend a lot of time talking about color, but color can often be the key to the rubric. And in this particular case, Barbera is a much denser, darker, purplier color. This wine, and oftentimes opaque in nature, this wine ain't that. And Gamay, as Tim alluded to earlier when he was having the conversation about Gamay versus Pinot Noir, also tends to be deeper and more purpley. At times, if it's Beaujolais Nouveau or Village, almost fluorescent purple. But even into the cru levels that Madeline was talking about before, it tends to be more purple. This is truly more of a red, and I would say not a super extracted red color. So I hope that's helpful. As we leave where we were in our friends saying ciao to, I should say, muchas gracias for our time in Rioja. I enjoyed my tapas. That was lots of fun. Not enough paella, never is. But as we fly, we're going to get back off the plane and we're coming back closer to home. For me, I need to be back in North America. I have a meeting scheduled. However, I'm going to make a quick stop in the far north, and we're going to go to our friends in Washington State, and we're going to go to the Columbia Valley. And this is a funny one because the winery two vintners, which sits adjacent to two vintners is both Morgan Lee and the folks who own the Covington winery, the Lawsons, is in I'm sitting here drawing a blank, Woodinville, but the
Woodinville.
vineyards are all out east. So it's very typical in Washington that the wineries and the fruit are separated from where the average person goes. To get from Seattle, which is where most people fly in, to go out to Columbia Valley, to Yakima, to Walla Walla, is hours and hours and hours in the car. And most people just don't want to do that. And it's very agrarian out there. So there's not like cool hotels and lots of neat restaurants and things to do. So most people stick closer to Seattle. They'll do day trips and they'll go to Woodinville. And Woodinville, which is literally 30 minutes outside of Seattle, is home to over 120 different tasting rooms and urban wineries that are in this area. So this particular one sits literally in Woodinville in the so-called warehouse district of Woodinville. And it's made by two vintners. Two vintners, as I sort of alluded to earlier, is a project between the Lawsons, David Lawson and his wife, Cindy, who own Covington Winery, and the space right next door, which is leased out to their winemaker, Morgan Lee, who's a terrific guy, a dear friend. And I might add, I have a bit of a man crush on Morgan. He's just a really cool dude. And this is his project, his own thing. And the goal started was that, people, the varieties that people don't necessarily think about with Washington State. People love certain varieties that they do, Cabernets and Rieslings and things like that, but they do killer Merlot and they do really good Syrah. And back at the time when they started this winery in 2009, nobody gave them any love whatsoever. So Morgan felt he wanted to start a side hustle project that the Lawsons helped him fund to do that, literally. And so it's obviously expanded over time. This is their Grenache. It is 100% Grenache coming from four rather renowned vineyards in the area. People in Washington State oftentimes buy a lot by that. So the Boucher Vineyard, the Olson Vineyard, the Weatherai Vineyard, and the Deneen Vineyard are four really killer vineyards. Morgan's a great winemaker. It's soft, it's creamy, it's all about Grenache, softly peppery, beautifully fruited, and exceedingly accessible.
Evan, I'm going to move to Madeline
Yep.
really fast, but there's one question that needs to be answered because most people feel like they bombed it, and they were in the results about 60% in Old World Italy or France, and only 30% got the Washington. So anything to help people along as they're trying to figure that out.
Most people, when they think of Grenache, they're not going to think of Washington. So I would say half of it's probably your own psychological connection. And once again, we've made a distinction, as you'll see from when we close things out here, of testable, examinable wines. This is not a testable, examinable wine. Having said that, it's a really good example of Grenache. So I think when you have to sort of at times separate the geography from that too. Washington, being at a higher latitude point, oftentimes does share some of the elements of terroir through cooler climate than you would say if you were getting a Grenache from, I don't know, Paso Robles or something like that, more alcoholic, richer, probably be laden with a little bit more oak too. And this wine does have a very European sensibility to it. So if that's why people kind of ended up in the Old World, because of the deftness, the softness, the brightness of the acidity, the crunchiness of the red fruit, I wouldn't get hung up on it once again. But I would say, if you're sitting here trying to get your arms around what Grenache is all about, that's Grenache. That's what Grenache tastes like for sure. Whether it's European styled or not, if this was a Côte du Rhône wine, it probably would have a bit more costo. It would be a little bit heavier, a little bit denser. This is definitely more in the elegant style of what it's doing, but that's also philosophically, as we talked about before, winemaker interpretation and all that. That's what Morgan's going for. I know that.
If it were Côte du Rhône too, chances are terrific. It wouldn't be a monovarietal.
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
and there, the 100% Grenache guys are not that easy to find. So I'm throwing that out there. I wouldn't know what to do with myself, Limang, if I had more than 5 minutes on wine number 6. So no worries,
Okay.
I have been tempered to this. So, okie dokie. Visually, we have a wine that is opaque. I can't see a damn thing through it. And actually, it's the darkest possible ruby. And the hue does not change. It actually at the very rim stays the same color, aka hue. If nothing else, I see a little bit of purple in it, which telegraphs very young red wine to me. And this ain't from a thin skin grape variety or varieties, right? If you just turn the glass, not only is it staining it beautifully, but those legs are trudging once they wake up, and they're pretty thick and
Pretty much
and
covers
slow.
up.
So that's telegraphing extract, one of my favorite words, and alcohol, right? So that said, aromatically, also it moves slowly in the glass heavily, which could also telegraph alcohol as well. This is a little bit of a subtext, but to me, the appearance is don't be desperate to start deducing from the appearance, but it's very useful, especially if you get stuck. It's just giving you a little hint as what's to come. Aromatically, I even forgot the questions I put up. Qualifying the fruit, ripe, perfectly ripe, overripe, dried, or fresh. Characterizing the climate and describing the oak influence. Cheers to that. So, aromatically, it is a combination of beautiful red, blue, and black fruit, ranging from perfectly ripe to maybe even a little bit jammy or cooked, but it smells oddly tart as well. And I'm getting sort of tart cranberry and sour cherry, as well as like blueberry jam and black plum that is happy when it's overripe, maybe even a little dried like figgy. There's a strong floral element, lavender, violets, possibly fresh and dried. Beautiful nose. Alcohol for sure. Dusty, fresh turned earth. It's a very primal aroma, but very seductive, very attractive. Black licorice. I'm going to go ahead and taste it. The oak, if I turn my mind to that for a moment, is just melted in, but it's probably like a five spice kind of expression. It's not, vanilla. Go ahead. Not that you're waiting for me to taste. And the attack confirms everything I suspected. Alcohol is high, but it works beautifully with this wine. It just shoves the fragrance and the flavor forward. It's probably, if I don't do the numbers game with alcohol, but it's got to be over 14. And I feel it in my chest, happily and pleasantly. Yes, there it is. Perfectly ripe fruit, verging on jammy, but the acidity is mouthwatering, which is almost counterintuitive to the alcohol level. So hold that thought. This is a thumbprint of this kind of wine. There is almost a simplicity to the flavor, but not in a manner that is unfulfilling or stupid. It's just very primal. I don't think it's developed layers. So, talk about polar opposite of expression to that lovely Rioja that was, defining vinosity. This is defining fruit. It is, the oak again is integrated. There is an earth element, more sort of turn dirt. We're digging up the weeds in the garden and now that we're into the cool autumn season, before we like mulch and don't pull out our lawnmowers anymore. Licorice for sure. I love the flavor of this wine. It is mouthfilling, slightly short, but I don't think that that's a reflection on the quality. I think it's simply reflecting the fact that it is young. A little bit of pepper spice, and with a little bit of heat in it. It could be the alcohol itself, or it could be a combination of black and white pepper that's giving you the illusion of actual heat. And I do taste both fresh and dried flowers on this wine. It is delicious. It is mouthfilling. It is primal. It is very fruit forward. And move over whatever we were considering with barbecue. I think this is our guy. So That said, what are we considering? Grenache blend, Zinfandel, Malbec blend. Malbec just is trying to get in this game, you know. And the one thing I will say with Malbec, it, you know, routinely will have this kind of color saturation. They get amazing color extraction at those high altitudes with the grapes thickening to protect themselves against ultraviolet light. Zinfandel, it could actually be absolutely be both from the appearance and that combination of both tart and ripe verging on jammy fruit. Grenache we're going to happily eliminate because we just had one and it's not see-through. So I like to, again, overstate the obvious. And what are we talking about? Regional considerations. Spain would apply to Grenache or Garnacha. France would apply to Grenache or Malbec blend. Argentina, Malbec for sure. And Zinfandel, we're in California. So have you voted? It is exactly 5:30. I hope you're going to be happy. I'm sorry, 5:30 in Detroit, right?
In Detroit. Well, here's where we are. We have 63% on Zin and 37% on Malbec. No one picked anything else, Maddie.
I love it. It's primal. It's straightforward. I agree with you.
One-third.
But I would like to know somebody, and there's more than one person who chimed in with other growing regions. So I am dead curious to know what the other is. And let's go ahead and get, you know, Evan and Tim don't mind sitting in economy for long trips. I'm on that aisle seat in business class, and we are leaving wherever we were. Oh, I don't need it. We're not going far away, right? We're going close.
We went from 2 vintners in Washington. Yeah.
Yes, we're going a little bit further south. We are going to California, indeed, and we are going to a growing region that I was lucky enough to visit. I'll never forget it, Evan, thanks to your Sonoma Summit. It is the Rockpile AVA, which is just in the northwest tip of Dry Creek. Isn't that correct? And it is a glorious region. It is, you know, you don't see a building right anywhere. You are at a high altitude. Talk about the opposite of wine number one, where you were at, like, you know, ground zero. And this is somewhere between 800 feet and 2,000 in elevation, with clear open access to the Pacific breezes. This is a region that is, this is really cool, between 10 and 15 degrees, routinely cooler than the Dry Creek Valley, which is just south, you know, as the crow flies, a short flight. Only about 150, 160 acres planted here. Relatively recent AVA, I think it was 2002. This is great name for a wine, right? Resolution. This particular producer, Branham, has been around since the mid 1990s on the heels of the Moritzen family that have become famous, whose ancestors first planted Rockpile back when, like, Jesse James was hanging out here, right? This is young, 2021. Because of that primal character, I can see why we might think it was 2022. And this gives you a glimpse. There's a little blue there. What is that? Get it out of there, you know, a little structure. There's nothing around. I mean, it's just so beautiful, so primal. This is red wine country for the most part. The family that owns this winery plants dominantly Zinfandel. This has 10% Petit Syrah in it also, which kind of, you know, explains a little bit of its lack of translucency, both aromatically and flavor-wise, and visually to me. It's a little bit of a happy, positive one-note wonder. They plant Syrah, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Porto varieties. And this, you know, by the way, if you were not hip to Tim's book, I have Post-its, right? You know, we all keep studying, and he simplifies things in the best possible way. Just a reminder about Zin. You've got that briery, herby character, which I always think of like taking the whole bush and shoving it into the bottle, you know, that bramble bush kind of character. But the key for Zin is that it ripens unevenly. So it's quite common to show both raisiny and underripe fruit. And they often have a combination of the ripe fruit and pepper spice quality, but that tart to ripe and even raisinated fruit is a very specific tell to Zinfandel. I think this is a beautiful wine. It is quite powerful. You know, it can handle bottle age like a house on fire. And I think it needs a little bit of time to develop layers, but I think it's a great ambassador for Rockpile and for Zinfandel. I'm only
Maddie, so
5 minutes
sorry.
late. Mhm.
So, just to throw in the question here, versus Malbec, how is it different
Yes,
from
thank you.
Malbec?
My tells for Malbec. First of all, I didn't even qualify. I was in such a hurry. I didn't, other than acidity, I didn't qualify the structural element of tannin. This is, medium plus, and it's, to me, more drying than Malbec tannins. When you talk about Argentine Malbec, my personal, fingerprints for that would be a strong, fresh florality. This has a little bit of a floral element, but more dried, and also very smooth tannins. And I don't find that Malbec, particularly Argentine Malbec, which is what we're talking about, has that bramble bush, garrigue, quality. It certainly has an herbal element, but it's that primal blue fruit also, and it doesn't have that verging on jammy, overripe, or even dried fruit quality too. Just perfectly ripe, high altitude, floral, smooth wine. But I can certainly tell, I can understand why you would wrestle between the two.